Okay, so we've got all the sub-assemblies done. As we said before, what we can do now is paint them up before we get them in and weather them. It'll just make things a lot easier. Now, interior cockpit colours can be a little bit tricky, but what I'm going to do, I'm using XF23, which is a light blue colour. Which gives us somewhat this effect in here, but obviously what's going to happen is we're going to give this a wash in a moment and dull it all down and grime it up, so in some ways that colour doesn't have to be spot on, because as I say, we are going to weather it up quite heavily. Because we're going to weather it, we're spraying this basically neat from the jar, so it's unthinned. So all we're doing, quite a high air pressure, we're just blasting this in all these areas. And just make sure you're getting in all the nooks and crannies. And try and get in as best as you can from all the angles. Something like that, okay? Same with the cockpit. We'll get in here as best as we can and we'll paint all this up afterwards. Okay, because this is that sort of greeny blue Russian interior colour that you find all too often on Russian jets. Okay, now the seats themselves, there is a choice on that. We can either do them this colour, interior cockpit colour, as is shown in some of the photos, or in other photos they actually look very green. So, as you say, it's a matter of preference to which way you want to do that. So what we'll do is we're going to do them green for the minute. And then if it doesn't look right, we're going to overspray them afterwards. But as you notice, we haven't got those seat covers on yet, because we'll take care of them once we're done. So just getting in from all the angles, just the same. Just pop that over here to dry. Okay, we'll just grab this one and do exactly the same thing. A little tip here, if you haven't got a locking tweezers, you can just clamp it like that and it makes a nice little, whoops, he says, and it's not working. Okay, it makes quite a nice little stand as well, just like that. Okay, so that's those bits done. Now we need those to dry off. Seats we can come back to at a slightly later date if needed. So what we're going to do now, we're somewhat going to basically fill in all these colour areas and things like that. We're going to paint all these up by hand now, getting out a small brush, take care of all of those, get them all done, and then we can come back and we're going to weather and wash, a little bit of chipping work and things like that. So I just clean out the airbrush. Okay, so as you can see, we've sort of moved on a little bit. So if we just bring this camera in here, you see, started painting up the cockpit. Now, if you've seen my other builds, you'll know roughly what I'm going to do here. So I'm just going to outline it. What we've done obviously the base colours you saw, and we've gone around, put the black panelling in, and using basically a toothpick or a cocktail stick, we're going around and picking out the silver work. So all we're doing is just using primary colours, and then we've got a bit of silver here, so we've used red and green before. That one's a particularly blunt cocktail stick. You want a nice sharp one. Just a bit on the end, something like this. Okay, then all we do is just come along and just touch the top and just dab and leave a little ball. So you want to be very light of how you actually come across this. Obviously different silvers will give you different effects. So if you want a nice bright switch, use a bright silver. But what you do is touch exactly where you want it to go, and you can do them just like so. So if we bring it right in, there we go. So in here, for instance, we can do dials, and that I'm going to leave for a little bit of a wash. But as you might notice, I'm not using a very bright silver here. So it's quite a toned down one, because we're doing this for more of an effect than a look, if that makes sense. So we're just going to give it a hint of, which I think will give us a far better look to all the switches than going around with a bright silver. Then obviously what we're going to do in a moment, as you'll see, we'll give this a bit of a wash, and then hopefully it will bring it all to life, give it a nice amount of depth. So just do these up here. Same on the other side. Okay, and that's our cockpit tub looking somewhat the business, as we would expect. Okay, so the other thing as well, obviously we can do it on the side panels. So just the same thing, picking out switches, just like so. You can see what we're doing here. Little squares, things like that. We can do just to liven up this cockpit. Now this one over here has got circuit breakers all over it. So what we're going to do, we're just going to pick out these 3 like that. Some of these bigger switches. Okay. And then what we do is when it gets a wash, hopefully it will lay in the panels quite nicely. And there we go, that gives us that type of effect. The other thing we've done at the same time is that we've installed the piping, as we said, into this cockpit. So obviously we've done green, the main barrel there is obviously in the silver, and then we've got like an orangey yellow pipe there, which is done as well. Letting those all dry off as well, because obviously we want to get in there with a wash just at the same time. So what we're going to do, we're going to let those totally all dry off for the moment. Okay, and as they're drying, what we can do is come back to the cockpit. Now, as you might remember, this is a clear piece of plastic, and then obviously the black is on there. Now, there is decals for this, and one thing you can do, which we're going to have a whirl at and see what it goes like, is put the decal onto the back and then scrape through the actual paintwork. Because this is an acrylic paint, we can do this little trick with it. So we're just going to lay this down. But we're just going to come along with our cocktail stick and scrape off the actual acrylic paint. So we're just scraping it all away to reveal, you won't be able to see in there, the screens come through. So we can just do this bottom one here. Then hopefully when we put the the decal on the bottom, it'll give us that nice effect, so we can go around and we can do dials. So I'll just do a few, then when we come back you can see what we've done here. But there we go, can you see what we're trying to achieve? We've actually got it coming through now so we can see the glass work. So I'm going to carry on putting those all over. We'll get the decal on the back and we'll see what it comes out like. Okay, so the cockpit area is all done now. So we bring the camera out a little bit, you can see. And hopefully you can see on the back there we've got the decal, and obviously it shows through on the front side. I've done a little bit of silver work and tidying up on all the bits and pieces like that, but I think it's quite effective. Yes, in all honesty, I'd love to see a resin replacement cockpit for this, some resin seats and away we go. But making the best of what we've got, I don't think that's a bad job at all. So okay, we're not going to install that for a moment because that's still a little bit wet and drying. But say we've gone around and we've done all the switches as we said before, and they're all sorted out and looking good. So the next thing we can get on with is start on the weathering process. Now you probably find it a little bit funny if you haven't seen these shows before that I don't use my weathering wash for what I'm about to do. Yes, I do love my weathering wash and all the rest of it, but when it's in very confined areas it doesn't give me the total effect that I'm after. So what I do is just make up a simple acrylic wash. So for that we've got some flat black XF51, okay, and then all we're going to do is put in about 90% thinners to about, brush full here, to about 10% paint, and just make up a very, very wet wash. So you've probably seen the colour cup here. This is almost nothing. So what we want to do, we want to get so it sticks to the side of the cup, but obviously isn't sticking too far. What happens is it will pull up against the side of high areas and things like that, and naturally it will want to grasp onto things. So there we go, happy with how that is. So we've sort of got this type of consistency going on here. You know, that's the type of thing we're after, just like so. So what we're going to do, we'll just check our flow. So we've got black just about coming out, very high air pressure, and all we're going to do is just lightly mist it on and stop. Okay, we're not flooding the area, we're just giving it a grimy effect and appearance. So obviously in wells, be careful, don't hang around in there too long, otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to get big areas pooling up. But what this will do, it will just give you a thing, and you might be able to see it on the close-up. If we bring you in just a little bit, you can see in there that obviously it pulls up around the middle areas and things like that quite nicely. Then obviously what we're going to do, we just get in here, and there we go. It gives you a sort of grimy look, and as you can see, there seems to be like a void between the panel line and the actual, then it gets darker in the middle, and it's just how it'll sit, but it will give us a nice grimy effect. As I say, don't over flood it. Okay, then we can go back into the cockpit area, and as you can see, it changes the colour slightly of the actual the sort of green-blue colour that we've got on the go here, and it just gives it more of a dirty, grimy look. So we come along with a cockpit tub as well, and it's a very fast way to give a grime effect. But as I say, don't hang around too long in there, otherwise you're going to end up flooding it, and as soon as you flood it, you get pools appear of where it sticks onto it, and then before you know it, you've got all types of trouble. So we're just going to do the seats as well. And as you might be able to see, if we just move that away, it works quite well on the seats. We just bring you right in here. You can see what we've got on the go here, but there we go. You see, you get that nice shading effect on the seats, just like that. And it's a nice subtle touch. And as it dries, it will dry it a little bit lighter. So you don't have to worry about that as such. So we'll just give it onto the seat as well. Okay. Okay, happy with how that is. And as I say, we'll let it dry, have another look back at it, let it dry, have another look back at it, and so forth and so on. And as I say, there we go, we're sort of getting that grimy, gritty type of effect going on in the wells, just like that. So there we go, that's the first bit. And then obviously what we can do, we can come in here afterwards and do a little bit of dry brushing to get some of the silver work up. But what we're trying to do at the moment, we're just trying to bring it all to life in there. So we'll just give it a little bit more on that side there. You can see it's a massive air pressure, but it helps to sort of get it in there, get it stuck in there, and all the rest of it. So just once more, just into these areas. It's just a very, very fast, quick, effective way of just dirtying it all down. And there we go, that's out. So we're quite happy for that. No problem with those at all. Okay, so what we can actually do now is really bring the two halves together, get these wheel wells all in to attach to it all, and then obviously we can start moving on with some of the other bits and pieces. Okay, so now we've got the actual cockpit tub and the other bits all dry and painted up, and they've slightly weathered as well. What we can do, we can just do a tiny little bit of dry brushing. Now for that I use quite a dark grey. This particular one is bolt gun metal, or any of the sort of metal colours. You want it to be sort of the more sort of black or dark grey version of metal than a strong silver, because you don't want it to stand out too much, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to grab a little bit of kitchen roll, like this. Okay, we're just going to flood the brush just a little bit. Okay, coming over, and we're just going to push it down. Now what we're trying to do is get it to soak into all the bristles, and then we can just lightly go around and rub it off. And as you probably see, it's quite dark, this one, which is quite nice. And then all we're going to do is just very, very lightly, just lightly brush over all the panels, just like that. Same for the other side, and over the instruments as well. It'll just highlight those a little bit. But what it does, it just gives us that sort of worn wear and tear look to the edges. So we're just going to pop up around these areas, just all around here. As I say, not too much on panels, but we're just trying to give it that look of scuffed, perhaps footwells, bits and pieces like that, sides of the bays for various things. There we go, it's just one of those areas, but as I say, with the other bits we've done. So we say we're going to do the same to the seats, exactly the same, and it just gives it that metal scraped look that we're after. So then same thing as well in the actual wheelbase. There again, we're going to come back afterwards and dirty these a little bit. So we just reload this up a bit more, brush it all off. Okay, now a flat brush works a lot better. So as you can see on here, I'm just doing it on somewhere it's not going to show, just to knock a lot of that off because it's a bit too strong. Once it's all off, we can very lightly just give it a rub in all these areas. Now it does give it that scraped off look to the paintwork. And it's just a warm scrub look. And so don't be too careful over where you do it. Just keep it random and light. Don't push in too heavy, because as soon as you push in too heavy you end up taking too much off. But there we go. Maybe if I move you in a little bit, you might be able to see in there. But it gives us quite a nice effect. And then obviously on this side it's going to be a little bit dark to see in, but you can see it just highlights that area. And obviously with the wash that it had, it just gives us that little bit more depth to the paintwork, a little bit more three-dimensional, and stops it looking quite plasticky. Now with those bits done, we can actually start to get this together. Now as I said, two ways of doing this. You can either come along with your cockpit areas, move that just a touch. So you can come in like this and we can pop the two halves together, okay, and do it, and then put the entire thing together. Or you can put the two fuselage parts, sort them out, line them up nicely. Even the right way around might help. There we go. So line them up. All happy how they are and sitting. Okay, we can come along with the other side. There we go, fit that in. Okay, and what you're trying to do is push together and make sure you've got no bad gaps. Obviously, if there's a huge gap coming out now, you're going to want to know why, and it's a good point to go back and look. Now, to be honest, these areas down here aren't the best in the world. What it is, there's little, the way it's moulded, little marks in amongst it. A couple of ways to get rid of that. Obviously, come along with quite a fine sanding stick and just rub it all the way down to tidy up any little blemishes. And if it's a dirty old sanding stick, you'll get little dark marks where it's showing you there's a raised area or something else like that. Don't use a strong one, because if you come along with a strong one, you go in there too far. Before you know it, you're coming back to filling and all the rest of it. But if you are going to go for that way, then obviously it's up to you, personal preference, but we can put these two halves together. Okay. Trying to line them all up as best as we can and get them all to sit nice and snug. Locating pins, make sure you've got all those in lined up. You can see we've got a little bit of a gap going on here straight away. That is where there was an ejector pin, or one of the mould marks, and as you can see there's another one up here. Okay, but what I want to know from my point of view, so what we're going to do, we just hold this here. Let's get a rubber band. Just for the moment, we're just going to pop a rubber band quite tight around this front so we get an idea of how it's going to look, and then we're going to come along with our nose section and we're going to pop it in, and we're going to look for any massive obvious problems that we have. Now if there's a huge step, then we know we can do something about it and have a look. If it's not too bad and everything else will be okay. Now the other thing to think about, you've got air intakes as well in this area, which obviously going to hide a little bit of it. I just want to check now and see how far they're going to come forward on this particular one. So what I'm going to do is, the quickest and easiest way to look is obviously have a look at our plans, okay? And we're just going to work out exactly how far these are going to come up in relation to panel lines and things like that. So what it is, it's going to cover up to just this panel line here, so it's just the top and the bottom really. So obviously we're not worried about this one, so what I'm going to do is fix it in two halves. So what we'll do, usual thing, the way I do it, we'll just grab some rubber bands and bits. Cheap bag of rubber bands is always a handy thing to have. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to use the wheel well, mind the little tabs that are all in the bottom. Okay, a couple of twists, just like that. Front one will also the same again. Okay, a couple of twists. Okay, what I'm going to do is just show you another little technique today. So what we're going to do, we're going to raise up the area. So what we're going to do, a couple of cocktail sticks, one each side of the actual joint. Okay, just like that. Now what this does, as you can see, gives us a little hole all the way through. So when we glue it, we're not going to get a glue mark. Okay, it's just a little tip that sometimes can be very, very helpful. So all we're going to do is just slide another one under there. Another one under there. Okay, make sure we're a nice distance. Same with the top as well. Just skim that under. And the great thing about using cocktail sticks for this, you can just poke them under your band and it's not going to affect anything too much. Now just make sure they're a nice distance apart, because all this work you're going to save by not gluing those areas could all go wrong in a moment if you do it the other way. So anyway, there we go, that's those on. So using our extra thin glue that we've got here, okay, coming along, and all we're going to do is tap and let the capillary action do all the business. I'm not going to be stroking around, we're just pushing this on. Okay, I'm just going to let that go down. So we're just going to brush underneath the area. Now if you're using these types of glues, make sure you use plenty of it. Now the reason I say use plenty of it is that when you come and sand and things like that, because you're just pushing on the top, if you haven't got enough, it won't go right the way through the joint. So also what we're going to do is round the inside of this wheel well as well. Just in there again, just let the capillary action do most of the work. Just touch and let it flow all over. Okay. Just do around this back, just on the other side, and you're just trying to make sure the wheel well is all lined up and looking smart as well, just like that. In with the top. There again, just said plenty of it on the top. Okay, and then just up here on the back. Okay, just need to smooth these apart. And there we go, that one's done nicely. And then obviously we're going to leave it on its side so it dries on its own. Also what we'll do whilst we think about it, is just going to put a drop around the former on the other side here, just so it all is nicely in the right circumference and things like that. So we're very happy how that one is now, just like that. We're going to do exactly the same to the main fuselage in this section. It's going to run glue down, hold it together with clamps, exactly the same way as that, and let them dry off, and then we can move on. Okay, so as you can see, we've got the main parts actually in there now, no problem. So, and what we've done is used a little bit of Mr. Surfacer, which we'll talk about in a minute, just to fill in these top lines as much as can. Now we've taken plenty of care, we're trying to line these up as best as we can. We've got the top one that goes in here, and this is pretty nasty, to be honest, getting that one in straight. It's just a plate, square plate that goes on. The bottom one is even nastier. So we've done a little bit of sanding to try and get this in. So what we'll do, we're going to push the back in first and then just try and squeeze the front in. Now it's a very tight fit and I have done a little bit of playing with it, but even to get that in now, as you might be able to see, just bring it a little bit closer on the closer, it's not a nice fit at all. So what we're going to do, we're going to roughly seat it in. Let's get this back one in first. Okay, and then what we're going to do, we're going to take some bands down. Going to place these over like so. Okay, then a similar technique as what we used for the to what we used with the gluing. We're going to hopefully be able to hold this in place a little bit better. So we're just going to come along with our cocktail stick. Okay, and we're going to go diagonally and try and get that to sit in. And just to nudge it all down a little bit, because it just needs to go down a touch. So what we're going to do, we're going to pop the sanding stick and all these little tools you have around, just to sort of wedge that in and keep that to sit nicely down. So there we go, that one's on. It's not a bad fit, it's not perfect by a long shot, but it's close enough to what we need it here. So what we're going to do, same thing again, coming in with the glue. Okay. And we're just going to let the capillary action do all the work for us and just flow all around the actual areas. So plenty of glue in here because it's quite a wide gap. And as I say, we'll let the capillary action hopefully take care of 90% of the work for us. So we just come in those, just down the other end in here. There we go. just in there with that. Okay, we're quite happy. Could do with a little bit more under there. So what we're going to do, we're going to pop in with another sanding stick, I think, just to try and nudge that one in a little bit more, just to hold that down. That's it. So what we're going to do, hopefully that'll go quite nicely. So you can use clamps or anything else just to hold this down. So I am going to pop just a little clamp, just a touch, just to hold that in, just like that, just to really push it in neat and get it in there. And as I say, it looks a bit of a funny situation, but it really does help. So what we can do, we'll leave that to one side to dry off. Now, as you can see here, I've been playing with the Mr. Surfacer on the top. Now, normally you can just come along with your sanding sticks very, very lightly and just sand these out. Just to speed this up, I've got this little tool here. And what we can do, we just come along and a bit like a dentist, we can choose which bits to take out. There we go, just like that. So what we can use, a couple of different grits of files. We've got a medium file here. We'll just pop in with that one first. Okay, and we can have a look and we can see how it all is. So we'll just get them in there first. Okay, not too bad at all, quite happy with the way that one is. So what we can do, obviously we can do the same on the bottom, but once we're basically happy, what we can do, we come along with this stuff, and now this is the Mr. Surfacer. Now this is the 500, they do a 1000 and then a 1200 as well. I like to use this one here, which is the 1000, because it's great for filling little imperfections. Now, if you ever get people's models and you think, how do they get such a lovely with not a single mark on there? This is the stuff. You paint this on, it's going to take about half an hour to dry. I would always give it an hour. Once it's totally dry, then what you can do, you can sand it off and buff it up and everything else like that. And that cleans off with cellulose thinners or lacquer thinners, depending where you are in the world. Nice and easy with the brush there. Okay, and that will do. So what we're going to do, we're going to let those parts dry. I'm going to roughly sand it to the point of view where you can join me back and we can really start getting the assembly of the main fuselage together.